This show is produced by the Harwood Podcast Network.
Hi, I'm Cindy Harris, and we love making this show available to you free of charge. If you'd like to help us keep it that way, make a contribution to our Karma Jar. For more information, go to our website. Today I've made these amazing tiramisu cupcakes. All I've done is made a really great vanilla cupcake that I've infused with some espresso and rum and then topped it with this fantastic mascarpone cream frosting and then dusted it all with a little bit of cocoa. They're just beautiful to look at and they are delicious to eat. We're going to begin by getting our 12-cup muffin pan ready, and for these cupcakes I'm going to use some paper liners. And with some baking spray, I'm just going to do a quick spritz on the top. Now I'm going to set the pan aside and get the dry ingredients ready. Now the first thing I'm going to measure out is my flour. So I'm going to lighten it up in the canister with my knife, and I'm going to measure out 1.5 cups of flour into my medium-sized bowl here. And then I'm going to add some baking powder, 1.25 teaspoons. That's going to be our leavening for these cupcakes. Then just a little bit of salt, about 1/4 teaspoon. Now with my small whisk, I'm going to whisk those ingredients together, making sure that I get the salt and the baking powder mixed through the flour. And then I'll set that aside. Now for this next part, we're going to begin using our mixer. Now I'm using my standing mixer here, but you could use a hand mixer. Either one works fine. And we're going to start by creaming our butter. So I've taken 1/2 cup of butter out of the refrigerator. I'm going to cut it in half lengthwise twice and then run my knife through it. And I want to make some little cubes of butter like this. And that will go into my mixing bowl. Now I'm going to put this on a medium speed and let the butter start to cream up. Now once the butter has started to break apart, I'm going to stop and I'm going to add 1 cup of sugar. And then I'm going to put the mixer down. I'm going to let this mix for 5 minutes. I want this butter and sugar to get really light and fluffy. Now after 5 minutes, you can see that the butter and the sugar gets really light and fluffy and a really light color. I want to take my spatula and scrape that down. And then I'm going to put it on a low speed. And I have 2 eggs and I'm going to drop those in one at a time. And once I see that the eggs are really well mixed in, I'm going to add 2 teaspoons of vanilla. And then I'm going to stop the mixer again and scrape down the sides. The butter has a tendency to want to stay on the side, and I really want to get the eggs and the vanilla and the butter really well mixed before I start adding the other ingredients. And then I'll let that spin a little bit. Now the last thing I need to measure out is a cup of milk. Now I'm using a 1% milk, but you could use whatever you have on hand. And I'm going to be adding the dry ingredients and the milk together alternately. So here's how I do that. I put my mixer on just a low speed. I'm going to take about 1/3 of the flour mixture and kind of sprinkle that in. Then I'm going to take half the milk and drizzle that in. Another 1/3 of the flour. The rest of the milk. And then the rest of the flour. Now I'm going to bump the speed up just a little bit, and I'm going to let this spin just until I start to see that the flour has combined. And the batter is nice and smooth. And then I'm going to stop, get my spatula, and scrape down that side because there will always be some flour that's kind of flung against the sides there. And I'll let this mix for just another 30 seconds or so. Now I'm going to give this just a final mix down with my spatula. Now do remember that whenever you're baking and you're using baking powder, that powder needs to be fresh because it's actually a chemical. And when it mixes with the wet ingredients, it starts to release carbon dioxide. And then when it goes in the oven, it releases again. So it's a double acting baking powder. That's what makes your baked goods be light and fluffy. If you use an old baking powder, the chemicals won't work as well. So it's really important that you always are using fresh baking powder. Now today I'm going to be using my large cookie scoop because this batter is kind of runny, and I'm going to be filling each of the wells up about 2/3 full. Now once you've divided all of your batter up, they should be nice and full like this. And do look to see if you have any drips. We want to get a paper towel and pick those up because those will bake super fast and maybe even start to burn, and we don't want that to happen. Now I've preheated my oven to 350 degrees. That's also really important. When we go to put something in to bake, that oven needs to be up to temperature and hot. We don't want to put the cupcakes in and then turn the oven on. It won't work as well that way. So I've preheated the oven to 350 degrees, and these are going to bake for about 20 minutes. Now when the cupcakes are done baking, we're going to be infusing them with a kind of espresso rum syrup. So I want to get that made now. Now I've made a 1/2 cup of espresso. You could also use just really strong coffee if you have it, but it is cold now, so I made it earlier today. And to that I'm going to be adding some rum. Now I like to use a dark rum, but if you don't want to use rum, you can actually use a rum extract. That would be fine too. If you're using the real deal, we're going to put in 2 teaspoons of dark rum. But if you're using rum extract, just add 1 teaspoon. And I'm going to stir that around. And then I'm going to set that aside, and we'll add that to the cupcakes when they're done baking. And after 20 minutes, they come out of the oven looking like this. And I do want to take a toothpick, pop it into the center of one of them, and make sure that it comes out totally clear. That means they're baked through. And these are going to sit here on the cooling rack for about 5 minutes. Now the next thing we're going to do is pop these out of the pan because I don't want them to stay in that warm pan. So with my fork, I'm just going to gently lift them out, put them on my cooling rack. Now while the cupcakes are still warm, it's time to get that espresso and rum flavor into the cake. So I'm going to take a toothpick, and on each cupcake I'm going to poke all the way to the bottom at least 12 toothpick punches. Now this is going to seem very wrong to do, but trust me, this is the best way to get all that great flavor into the cupcakes. You know, this is an old-fashioned trick. My grandmother used to do this with some of her cakes. To get the flavor in, she'd take a toothpick and just punch these holes in it. Now, you won't see the holes of the toothpick, but it really does help that syrup seep into the cake. Now I'm going to take my mixture, and I'm going to use just a little bit of syrup at a time. I want to make sure that that cake really absorbs the flavor. I don't want it running off onto the cooling rack. So just take your time and spoon the syrup on top. Now as you're using up more and more of your liquid, try to cover most of the surface area of the cupcake. If you stay just right in the center, that's where most of the flavor will be centered. So just try to move it all along the surface area of the cupcake. This takes a little bit of time and a little bit of patience, but it is totally worth it in the end. Now once you've got all of that great espresso rum flavor in the cupcake, we need to let these sit for about another hour, and then we'll make our frosting. Now when it's time to make your frosting, if you're going to use a standing mixer like I am, you'll want to put your whisk attachment on. Otherwise you could use your regular hand mixer. And this frosting is a mascarpone cream frosting, much like what we would use if we were making a full-size tiramisu. Now mascarpone cheese is an Italian cream cheese. It's very soft, like this, and I have 8 ounces of it. I'm going to put that in my mixing bowl along with 1/3 cup of sugar. I'm going to let that cream for just a few seconds, And then I'm going to add some heavy cream, and I have a half a cup of that, and I'll add that into the bowl, along with 2 teaspoons of vanilla and 2 teaspoons of dark rum. Now, if you're going to use rum extract, just use 1 teaspoonful. Now I'm going to whip this much like I do when I'm making a whipped cream. I started on a medium speed, and then once the ingredients come together, I bump it up to a high speed. You'll want to let this spin on a high speed for a few minutes until it starts to get nice and thick. Now it's going to take a little less time than if we were making whipping cream because we've got that mascarpone in there. But see, this is the thickness that we want. Now it's time to frost our cupcakes. Now I've transferred them all over here to my rimmed baking sheet, and the reason I've done that is because our frosting is this mascarpone cream, it has to be refrigerated. So if you go ahead and put your cupcakes on a rimmed baking sheet like this, even after you frost them, they're easy to move in and out of the refrigerator. Now you can totally frost these cupcakes just with a knife, but today I'm going to use a piping tip. So I've got my disposable bag, and I have a really large round tip, and I'm going to put that into the bottom, and then I'm going to cuff the sides of the bag down just like it were a boot, and then I'll take and spoon all that great frosting into my bag, getting as much in as I can. And then I'll lift that cuff up. And then you want to take the very top and just kind of turn it. That will force the frosting down into the tip, nice and slowly. There it is. And for this, I'm just going to hold the bag up perpendicular to the cupcake like this. I'm not going to go to the very edge of the cupcake. Come in just a little bit because I want to be able to see some of that espresso and rum. And as I go, I just kind of twist that bag a little bit, forcing that frosting down into the middle. I like how this method, the frosting kind of sits on top of the cupcake. I think that looks kind of neat. And then once I need some more, I just open up the bag. Again, cuff it down a little bit and refill it with the rest of the frosting. Again, I kind of give that a twist, and then I just keep going. And for that classic tiramisu topping, a little bit of cocoa powder. So in my smallest, finest little strainer, I have just put like about a tablespoon of cocoa powder, and I hold it over the top of the cupcake, and with my spoon, I just tap it very lightly, just maybe 2 or 3 times. And that's it. Now remember, you will want to store these in the refrigerator, and then when you're ready to serve, just take them out and serve them as is. They're just delicious. Well, if you'd like to give these tiramisu cupcakes a try at home, just go to our website and go to the Cupcake show notes, and I'll have the recipe there for you. Now, if you make them, don't forget to send me a photo so I can send you the cupcake badge. Make sure to join us on Facebook, and as always, if you have any questions or ideas for me, please send me an email. I'll see you next time.